So one of the hardest things about being an entrepreneur is breaking out of that initial phase that you're in, going from level 1 to level 2. It's about delegating. It's about growing as a leader. It's about working on the business, not necessarily in the business. And to me, it's about strategy. So I've brought one of my really good friends here today, George Marano, Dr. George Marano, to talk about strategic management and how entrepreneurs can start to think strategically like big businesses. George, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
What is strategic management, and how can everyday entrepreneurs and leaders apply it in their life, in their work?
Well, I mean, strategic management is basically the academic discipline of what we refer to as strategy. And it basically, in a nutshell, is the systematized and structured approach to achieving our goals and objectives. It sounds very, very simple in its description, but it's multi-layered. But what it does do for leaders and entrepreneurs and so forth, it gives us a bit of structure around where we want to go and why we want to do that. So, I mean, it's multifaceted. It's as I said, it's a structured approach in how and how we want to achieve those goals and objectives.
I guess I'll just pick up on the structure. I think one of the hardest things about being an entrepreneur and being a founder or a solo founder, or even if you have a co-founder, is that structure, because at the beginning, you're so focused on getting things off the ground, making it work, and you become your own structure. But when it comes to a point where you have to implement a structure, how do you actually do it?
Yeah, I mean, you almost have to have an what I call an out-of-body experience, where if you don't have help, which is very hard for many entrepreneurs, because resources are tight, you have to almost force yourself, right, to look at yourself as a third person, right, and try and be as objective as possible, and start to structure and frame what needs to be done. I mean, and you're right in that sense. It's almost like, it's almost like a rocket ship. It's the hardest part in the trajectory is the actual liftoff itself.
Yeah.
Right. But it's that liftoff part that needs to go up in a vertical straight line, right? And then it can kind of deviate however it wants to. And what strategic management does is it has a whole bunch of tools and theories and frameworks that allows us to structure what we're doing and why we're actually doing it.
So tools, frameworks, sounds very academic. You are an academic, which is great. That's why I've brought you here. Academia has its beauty, but to a lot of entrepreneurs, we may have run away from corporate PTSD. We may have run away from institutions, and we're kind of like, in the war that is business. How does strategy in academia differ to strategy in the business real world? And how can they work together rather than work in conflict?
Yeah, look, and that's a really good question, because as you know, I straddle both sides. I have a consulting business. I teach at Sydney University's business school, and I've been an entrepreneur myself. I went into university for the first time after 15 years of work. Right? However, academia, right, and where it gets lost, and where the corporate world or even entrepreneurs get lost, is because academics are outsiders looking into the business world, and they're looking at it objectively. Yes, they study phenomena. Let's say, for instance, change management, strategy, leadership, entrepreneurship, and so forth. They collate all this information. They come up with theories, frameworks, tools, guides, and so forth, which are fantastic, right? Which are almost akin to the recipe of a cake, right? However, what they don't take into consideration is an individual's behavior, skill sets, motivations, just their timing in life, right? And their experience as well. So you take those, right? The objective is to take those frameworks and superimpose it over what it is that you're doing. But you also need to be mindful, right, that each individual that does that will come out with a different set of circumstances. Academics are only there to just provide you with that, the onus really, and the competitive advantage for entrepreneurs and leaders is to be able to absorb that information and use it to their benefit, right? Just like a recipe in a guide, in a cookbook, or using Google Maps to direct us on where we want to go. But it's from an academic perspective, they can't take in those individual behaviors and skills.
I like the analogy of the cook. You've got, a cook that knows how to cook. They've been in the kitchen for 5 years. They don't read recipes. And then you've got the cookbook, which is fantastic. And I think what we'll talk about in this conversation is the power of combining the two, right? It doesn't have to be this or that. You can be a great cook. If you use the recipe book, you can be a fantastic cook. Back to entrepreneurs and leaders. What are some practical ways, if I'm listening to this as an entrepreneur and I've built a business, I've got, a couple of $1 million of revenue a year, I've got a team, a dozen, 10, 20, 30 people, but I want to become the best in my market. I want to build $1 billion business. How can I start to implement strategy today without yet going into the academic side? What are the common things that you think entrepreneurs miss to take them from, $5-10 million to $1 billion on the strategy front?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question, Peter, and one that confronts many individuals. First of all, you're going to have to want to be like that, and understand the challenges that also come with it as well. When it comes to scaling and growing businesses and so forth, it's not really for the faint-hearted, right? Ideally you have to expect that and this is one of the, and I speak with regard, personally as well, is that you're going to have to start giving up the things that you like and the things that you need to do. You need to start delegating and start trusting people, right?
Yep.
Take in, right, people's mistakes.
Yep.
You're going to have to be patient and allow people to grow.
Yep.
You're also fundamentally wanting an organization that learns on its own, right? And sell this journey to everybody, right? Now, some people might in the organization want to come on board, some people might not, right? But this is and I think communication is really one of the fundamental aspects with regards to organizations and scaling up, communicating internally. There's a great emphasis on marketing to our clients and customers and potential, but internally as well, right? My philosophy really, not only from a strategy, but not only from the consulting perspective, but also my own personal strategy is that if you look after the inputs, the outputs take care of themselves. And those inputs are our staff, right? First and foremost.
How do we strategically start to think about our staff, our team? How do we shift from the early days where you had to be involved in everything to a point where you want to let go, but you maybe can't because you don't have that confidence? How does strategy or strategic thinking help overcome those issues? Is it about going and getting different talent, or is it all about the internal change?
Well, the internal change is the first and foremost. And we understand that, as entrepreneurs in a micro business, you're actually straddled with doing all the functions of the business. And sometimes it's very hard to give up. However, as the individual, the onus is on you to first be able to release and delegate and understand that, the person that you delegate this to might not meet your standards of how you've done it. But however, it has to be done, right? Otherwise, and that's also for the small teams as well that have stuck by you, But as you grow, you need to be able to communicate that as well. Our growth is reliant on people, and those people require time and effort and our patience and understanding as they grow in their roles as well. So it's really a mindset first, and also the communication, because we know what happens to organizations who don't, and individuals who don't let go of those roles. They basically just get drowned in work, right? So you have to give it up basically.
How long do you think, from your experience and from academia and your own, corporate experience, do you think it takes to go through that period where you come to the realization that I need to delegate, I need to move out, I need to bring people in, they might not be able to do things as good as I can do them, but I need to invest in this process? How long does that typically take from a micro business going to a mid-tier business?
Yeah. I measure that on an individual's time and where it's taken. If you're spending more than, say, between, say, 60 and 70% of your time on tasks and routines and so forth,
yep,
then it's time to start thinking about delegating.
60%. So 60% of your time on things that are maybe management, managing rather than leading or growing.
That's exactly right. And you need to be able to create a certain degree of what I call strategic flexibility. That is time, right? Time that you can allocate to maybe things that pop up, client meetings, going out there, looking, building networks, doing stakeholder engagements and so forth, or dealing with those black swan or the unknown aspects. Or even if there's a period of significant growth where you don't have time to find staff, in the short term, right? Or if somebody leaves, you need to have that strategic flexibility. I think the academic term for that is it's slack resources, right? Just like the slackness in a rope, yeah, it kind of gives you that flexibility for stretching. So you need to have a degree of that, and the more you go up the organizational chart, right? And I mean right to the CEO, the leader, the entrepreneur, you need to have a significant amount of that, right? And it also gives you time to think and reflect, because as you go, as your role is up there, you need to be doing less of the internal, as you said before, and more on the external. So thinking strategically, thinking outwards, thinking about how it grows.
How do you then move it to the next point where you do that, you implement it, you spend a few months, you find some great people that you can kind of invest in to take over you so you can free yourself up, but then creating a culture where the people below them or the people around them, that continues, that doesn't just stop, because then you're going to have to jump back in, right?
Yeah.
And do it all over again. So how do you build a learning and development or a leadership development, or what's the actual term that you'd call that?
Yeah, that is, that's culture, first of all, is a top down. And it's not something you kind of put on paper, but it's actions that are viewed by the organization, right? Culture, in its simplest description, is the way we do things. So you model, first of all, the key is to model that behavior and then enforce it as well. You can enforce it, with, programs such as mentoring,
Yep,
training, development, cross-skilling. If you're an organization that's small enough, or when you're an organization that, and this seems banal, but it's actually quite important. If you're a business where everybody works on the same floor,
yeah,
right? Yeah, you get individuals to come and understand what this person does and what this person does and what this person does, so that you can understand how they fit in the overall scheme of things, right? And then if you build that, and as you scale, you still have that knowledge of where my part is, right? Ideally, if you grow to a particular, if you grow to a huge size, you might have departments, and this is departments that are kind of geographically dispersed. And this is where you kind of the problem there is where you create those silos. However, you have to have formal mechanisms so that you've got cross-pollination between departments. And when you have that, that's where you get those efficiencies.
We have a culture where we outsource things that we're not specialists in. So we outsource our tax to our accountant. We sometimes outsource marketing to an agency, legal to a lawyer. But arguably, strategy is the glue that holds it all together if you want to go to that next level. Do we have a culture issue in terms of people outsourcing strategy because it sounds a bit waffly, it sounds a bit opaque, or do you think that's just the maturity of an entrepreneur? How do they go and seek that advice or bring that in so that they don't have to do that too, right? Because we're talking about delegating. How do you delegate that stuff? The strategy, the leadership development, the things that take you from micro to a bigger business?
When it comes to the strategy, I wouldn't consider it as outsourcing. I'd consider it as more like a partnership where you have the strategy consultant that comes in, once a year we'll do a strategic plan, and then, have a 3-month checkup to see, how we're moving along with that strategic plan, what needs to be changed. Because remember that strategy, even though strategy is internal, there is this interplay between what we do from an organizational perspective and what are the changes in the environment. Right? So there's always that interplay between the two. And we're asked to, in strategy, we're asked to be rigid, right, and follow a particular line. But, to put it in another metaphor, we need to think of strategy like sailing in the sense that, it's a bit of a zigzag, right, in order to achieve our goals and objectives, because sometimes those goals and objectives change right, as the environment changes as well. But, from a consulting perspective, don't view it as outsourcing, view it as a complementary. Right? And, organizations and individuals in organizations, we want to harness and foster their skills of critical thinking and then collate those all together. What we only do is just kind of come along and just facilitate that critical thinking. Individuals in businesses, leaders and the individuals in the business know their business really well. From a consulting perspective, all we do is shine a light on what it is that they do.
Yeah, that's a really good way to discuss it, because you can outsource your tax because you're not supposed to become a tax expert. You can outsource your legal because the law is not your specialty, but the strategy and the hunger and the components and the DNA of your business are about you as the leader and the entrepreneur or the founding team. And sometimes they get stuck. So it's more of a partnership about bringing that expert in. So you're more like an extension to a team, right?
Yeah,
rather than an outsource.
Yeah, absolutely. And without going into the confidentials of our other clients, we can see how other industries, other organizations who've, in the past who've followed that trajectory, what they've done well, what the roadblocks are, and we're able to share that. That's where our skill set comes in.
What's the biggest mistake from your vantage point that entrepreneurs and leaders do get stuck up on and that leads to failure? What's the biggest red flag for you?
One of the biggest red flags that I see is that not prioritizing their time to be in that space that gives them those slack resources. And giving yourself that flexibility in time is so important. Right? To me, flexibility in time is like sleep in the evenings. If you don't get enough of it, you wake up drowsy and weary and so forth. Right? You need to have that. It allows us to reflect. It allows us to let the pieces fall together. It's hard to describe, but it's, our brains are like a black box. And yeah, and because there's so many moving parts in the organizations, we need to give ourselves that time to think. Just a half an hour, coffee in a cafe away from the office and just staring into the abyss could give us, could allow us some form of insight, right? So, that's one of the things also. And another thing also is the delegation. Delegation is the key, right? Mm-hmm. And understanding that perfect is the enemy of good, right? One other thing also is that we also need to be realistic, that nobody loves your business like you do, right? And that's really the hard truth. Right? So be mindful of that.
I think also they're three fantastic points, and I'm thinking about myself also as I listen to these lessons for myself. I think another lesson that I've also learned is that no one loves your business as much as you do, but your business probably isn't as good as you think, and you're not as good as you think. And there's always room for improvement, no matter how hard we've tried, no matter how much we think we know the answer to something. There's a sense of humility in standing back and having an accountability partner come in, having a different vantage point, someone unbiased, shining that torchlight on you, making yourself vulnerable, but ultimately making yourself better.
Yeah, and the ability to take objective criticism, right? Or somebody come in and say, look, this could be better. I don't think this is right. It's a skill that takes a bit of time to absorb, right? Especially if you've grown a business from $0 to $5-10 million, right?
Yeah.
Thinking, wow, I've done this, but your ability to take, and there's some who project negativity, and then there's some who actually have, quite, the feedback is what you might consider negative, but is objective. You've got to be able to discern between the two, right? Yeah. However, if you're able to take any of it in and not allow it to be personal, I think that's one of the hugest advantages any leader can have.
Now, there's two interesting things right over your shoulder. There's a beautiful Assyrian face, which we'll talk about later, and the importance of having that cultural preservation, and also a big stack of books. On the books first, what's a great book that someone listening to this can order off Amazon today, read over the next month, and start their journey into becoming a better leader, better entrepreneur, a better strategic thinker?
Look, as an academic, I really can't do anything without actually kind of saying, the undergraduate textbook, right? If you want to learn, I think you start off as an undergraduate, right? As that 19-year-old in university, the book is quite big, but it's very simple. It starts off from the most basic most basic elements of strategy, which is understanding what your mission and vision is. Now, these are two concepts that are kind of ubiquitous in the corporate world, but do many people understand those? Right? They understand the components of it and what it actually means. And this is a really good start. However, also, and for the leader and for many other leaders and entrepreneurs, the Harvard Business Review has some really good books. I've just finished reading, Change Management. But if you get the box set, and excuse me, the Harvard Business Review has this box set, and they're a great resource to have. They
look good too. They make you look
smart. They look good, but they're really and Harvard Business Review has done an excellent job in taking what is, journals written by academics and for academics and produced it in a particular language that I think is absorptive and digestible to many people in business.
Yeah.
And it's written in a format with structure, with frameworks in those as well, right? In and around those particular topics, that if you're able to harness those, they're actually quite useful. Now, it's a little bit of insight from what we do. And, what we do is not rocket science, right? From a consulting perspective, because, our work, right, our work and our delivery basically comes from a combination of all these.
Yeah.
The books are the information. Right? It's its implementation that, and like I said, because we straddle both sides of it. For us, it's a lot more easier, right? But however, take on the Harvard Business Review, an undergraduate textbook, and I think you're well on your way, right, to becoming more strategic.
Now, I actually sent George a little bit of a summary of our conversation today. We're about to enter the last question, but I want to sneak one in, if it's all right with you. I touched on the point that George has got an awesome Assyrian king statue sitting on his desk, and we're both Assyrians. We're proud Assyrians. We're part of the community. We love our community. George, my question to you as a successful Assyrian academic and business person, and someone who loves their community and has pride in putting your heritage on your desk, how can Assyrian business owners and Assyrian leaders be more strategic together in working together, and in networking and in pursuing a common goal?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think we need some sort of formal institution that kind of brings us together, but also acknowledge the fact that we're in a unique and precarious situation in that, the diaspora is large and dispersed. Our homeland, our population in the homeland is dwindling. We still have a presence there, courtesy of the church. However, the conditions are getting harsher and harsher, right? I mean, the Middle East has always been a geopolitical hotspot for millennia, right? So we need to, as a community, really come together, right? And really see how we can all work together, right? I mean, there's some fantastic individuals like yourself and so forth, right, who have done extremely well, who are productive members of the community, and who can offer something to other members in the community as well. And I don't just say this from our community, I say this from all other ethnic communities as well. And I mean, this is the purpose of networking. Mm-hmm. And this is the purpose of many of those networking businesses and clubs and so forth that populate, the landscape. So it's really important and incumbent on us, really, as a culture that arguably is one of the oldest in the world, with a language that's also one of the oldest in the world as well. So, I mean, we have a burden and a responsibility to maintain that over the next few generations.
Well, I know you're working really hard on something. I'd love to have you back to talk about that more in the foreseeable future. Before we wrap, final question. If you go back to George, Marano, 15, 20 years ago, what advice would you have for yourself? And what would you tell yourself that you've learned that you didn't know, but that you now know?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a bit of a curveball. Now, I wasn't always the academic, right? And I certainly, and people from 20 years ago would probably pass out if they found out. However, there are a few things I would love to tell myself 20 years ago. One of those would have been to be focused, right? To be focused, and then to be disciplined, right? Understanding that you need to do the same thing over and over and over again, right? The key to success, it's like innovation. People talk about innovation, right? But innovation comes from doing the same thing. It's being disciplined and doing the same thing over and over again, and allowing the product of that to, allowing that to sink in and for something to come out. Another thing also is that be quiet, right? Be quiet, fly under the radar, do what you have to do, right? And then build. There's that saying, talk quietly but carry a big stick. Yeah. So, be quiet, do what you need to do, and then just build on yourself, right? And if you combine all three of those, that's a catalyst, for early success.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that wisdom. Thank you very much for making a topic that's sometimes complex and large, very easy to understand, very easy to apply. Thank you for sharing your insights to the entrepreneurs and leaders that are listening to this and needed to be told that sometimes they are the thing that's standing in the way of growing their organization, growing their business. And thank you for shedding light into strategy and strategic management. Any final words?
Thank you very much, first of all, Peter, for the opportunity. And a strategy is not one of those things that you do once. You have to make it a way of life. And we do strategy all the time. We do it consciously and subconsciously as well. So just be mindful of that, right? And like I said, yeah, make it a way of life, and then your life will become a little bit more simpler, right?
Great words. Thanks, George.
Thank you, Peter.